Okay.
Go.
So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this webinar that is devoted to the launch of Luisa Marin's latest book, Solidarity and Crisis in the European Union. The book was published by Kikuchi in 2024. It is available as an open access publication. It can be downloaded for free from the publisher's website. And for those who are then watching this as a recording, the link will be provided below. Also, on behalf of the directors of the Sant'Anna's Legal Studies Stalls program, we are delighted to present this book alongside the author, Luisa Marin, from the Università dell'Insubria in Como. We also have Professor Susanna Cafaro from University of Salento, who will be a discussant. Unfortunately, we will not have Anna Bobic, who is a senior researcher from the Hertie School in Berlin. She'll no longer be able to join us due to illness, so we wish her a speedy recovery. So the format of this event will be, first, Luisa Marin will present her book for the first 25 minutes, followed by comments from Susanna, who will have around 15 minutes. Then I'll give the floor back to Luisa Marin to respond to any of the comments, and then we'll open up the floor to a general Q&A session with the audience. Please feel free to write down your questions in the chat in advance, and then I'll come to them when I've opened the floor to the audience. But also when I open the floor to the audience, if you want to ask your question by opening your mic, please just raise your hand first, and then I'll call upon you to open your mic to ask your question. This event will be recorded and uploaded to the Stall's YouTube channel. So please make sure that your microphones are not open when you do not intend for them to be open. This event will finish at 7, so it will be a total 1 hour and a half. So yes, Luisa, thank you for accepting our invitation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Sian, for the introduction, and thank you to Giuseppe Martinico for the invitation to present the book to stars, but also, for the funny exchange we've had throughout the process. I'm really happy to be here. I know Giuseppe since ages, since after the PhD, and so I'm very happy to be here with you now and to present this book. So this book is indeed about solidarity and crisis in the European, and I have to say before I start that I work at the University of Insubria, which is indeed having 2 seats. One is Como and one is Varese. So I work in Varese at the School of Economics. You couldn't know it, but so I want to be.
It's my fault. It's my fault. I gave the wrong piece of information to Sian. It's my fault.
No worries. So indeed, this book is about solidarity and crisis in the European Union, and it is also very interesting work. There's been an interesting experience for me because for the first time I really wanted to work on topics that were different from the different policies of the area of freedom, security, and justice. So this book it talks about crisis of the European Union and also personal transitions, because this is the first important work that I did after coming back to Italy after my work years in the Netherlands. And it is also a book indeed that sets a new research strands for me, because it is the first time that I worked on topics connected to European economic integration. So I was really happy to work on this book. And at one point, on the 5th of May 2020, the vice judgment of the Bundesverfassungsgericht provided for me an occasion to start working. So for me, it's representing a turning point, because I have perceived and I have interpreted the judgment in a way that I was really puzzled by the confrontational attitude by the Bundesverfassungsgericht. So that really at that time I thought, now I really want to work also on topics related to economic integration. Then I had already some literature produced on the topics of solidarity in the context of asylum and migration. And that provided for me a bit of a blueprint to start thinking about those topics. And then at one point, when I joined the EUI as a Marie Curie alumna on a Marie Curie grant that is partially funding this book, I had the chance to start working with colleagues on a project that led to this edited book. So I wrote a chapter for this edited book by Francisco de Abreu Duarte and Francesca Palmiotto on sovereignty, technology, and governance after COVID. And there I started to think at, what has been provided for as solution with COVID time, and what was, what were for me the challenges behind the EU finding that solution. So as it happens, when we start writing something and we are really very much, we get into the topic and we get very passionate about it, from a chapter, a book is born, and that's the book. So this is also the book that is, as I anticipated, or as I was anticipated by Giuseppe, the book is available in open access because it is partially funded by the European Commission. And so in this context, I started elaborating on some of the conceptual premises that I've started working on in the book chapter. And I decided indeed to focus on two case studies and assessing these two case studies that are the pandemic crisis and the energy crisis, in order to see how the principle of solidarity has been enacted in the package of solutions adopted by the European Union to face the consequence of this crisis. So to come back a bit, the book builds a bit on I think a premise that I find very important, and what I think one of the aspects on which this book gives an original view is trying to assess crisis both from the governance perspective, but also from the European constitutional law perspective. And I think that indeed I've assessed this crisis in my premise, in my conceptual premise, in the introduction of the book. I've decided indeed to assess some governance crisis of the European Union as expression of incomplete supranationalization processes. What does it mean? What I argue, or what I use as a starting point, is that I argue that governance crises are, to some extent, also the consequence of incomplete supranationalization processes, which means that EU treaties do represent the codification of policy choices and policy preferences. Sometimes these policy preferences are embedded also can be embedded in secondary law, and often governance crises are also the product of the constraints of the European Union, of this incomplete, let's say, constitution of the European Union that defines what the European can do, but also constrains the action of the European Union. And for example, I think that one of the, let's say, crucial, I think, starting points of the Economic and Monetary Union is that we have an exclusive competence on the in the context of the monetary policy, but we have a sui generis, at least we had in the treaties, a sui generis weak coordination policies when we were talking about economic coordination competencies. So I think that this is something that tell us that the law codifies the policy preferences of the negotiators of the treaty when they have been designed, and starting also from the context of asylum law, which I mentioned in my conceptual premise. Sometimes these preferences are also codified in secondary law, but still they represent very entrenched policy preferences that are very hard to eradicate once they are there. And it's not a case that even the recent measures of the pact that have been in 2024 transformed into legislation, so they have been mainly enshrined in EU law in regulations, they nevertheless keep codifying the same policy preferences that are really at the very origin of integration. And I think, for example, the first country of entry in the context of asylum policy. So what I say here is that incomplete supranationalization processes define and hinders also the action of the European Union. And this treaty framework is also the context for constitutional litigation around it. So sometimes there are conflicts of sovereignty as a result of incomplete integration processes. I think we can discuss on my definition of conflicts of sovereignty. And I've had also the chance to anticipate the discussion in direct exchanges with Giuseppe. But at the same time, the rules we have in place have proved to be also rules that are contested by the actors, also through constitutional dialogue processes that at times can become conflictual. And I think that we've seen that also in the context of Hungary, in the context of asylum law with Hungary. And I think that in my understanding, VICE also represents a case of conflictual relationship between the German Constitutional Court and the Court of Justice of the European Union. So starting from this perspective, I've tried to understand what can be the role of solidarity in the context of European integration by assessing some recent cases. So the case of the constitutional of the pandemic crisis and the case of the energy crisis, and I've tried to see what can be indeed the role of solidarity in that respect. Also because solidarity has been since the beginning one of these wonderful buzzwords of EU law. It has been deployed by the, so it has its own life in the political discourse. So it is invoked by the political actors, and I think it has its own life in the political discourse. But I think what I argue is that it has also a value as a constitutional clause of the system of the European Union, and it has a value as a constitutional clause that brings flexibility into the system. So in addition to all the meanings of solidarity that have been, let's say, already deployed or already discussed, I think that there is an additional meaning of solidarity as one of the vectors of flexibility of the system. So why and how? Well, in my, let's say, reconstruction of the, so solidarity, as I said, it has been invoked by the Court of Justice many times as one of the crucial argumentations and principles used in EU law in order to consolidate the implementation of EU law into domestic legal orders and many other meanings. And I think that's, what we can see about solidarity is that it is a concept which is polysemic, so it has several meanings, but even as a legal principle, it is a concept which is polymorphic. It has several meanings also as a legal principle. And I think that what I try to focus on especially is the meaning of financial solidarity in the European Union, because eventually with the measures that I've assessed, I think one of the core meanings in the context of European integration is the meaning of financial solidarity. So, one of the crucial challenges is the dimensions of solidarity as, addressing the financial relations between states and between the union and also the citizens to some extent. So what I do in my, let's say, analysis with the case studies is that I go through how the principle of solidarity is embedded in the treaties, in the treaty framework governing the policy areas that I've considered. And for example, I have addressed also past crises. And for example, this has happened in chapter 2, when I talked about the principle of solidarity and the pandemic crisis. I also get back, I make a step back, and I also assess a first case of, let's say, crisis in the context of the European Union that has been solved with thanks to the flexibility of the system. I would like to say why. So basically, what my starting point is that indeed we have this incomplete integration framework, and several situations or crises have demonstrated that the EU law, the treaties, do not provide for a complete system of law that can be fit for every situation. And when very, remote, very something which was not even a problem for us, like the subprime mortgages, we didn't have such things, I think, but nevertheless, that first great financial crisis for the US market has been, evolving into our system, into the Eurozone, as a sovereign debt crisis. And I think that back then, we could already see that the law created with the treaties was not really complete. So we needed, in order to be able to face crisis, to work around the rules in order to design solutions to those crises. And this has happened with the European stability mechanisms that have been created outside the legal framework of the treaties with an international treaty. And it has been accepted by the Court of Justice as, expression of the room of maneuver of the member states that they have indeed to enjoy when we were faced with the situation of Greece. And therefore, once we were there, the European Union and the member states had to adopt solutions in order to face the critical situations that emerged back then. The pandemic crisis, I will move a bit forward, has provided also another important crisis that has been touching that has been shared by all member states. And in this context, the solution adopted, I don't want to repeat what is perhaps already known by most of us, is that the European Union has designed a package of solutions going from the shore to Next Generation EU. And Next Generation EU is especially interesting if compared to the European stability mechanisms, because it is adopted in EU law, so according to the as instruments of secondary law, and nevertheless it represents a very original solution, because it addresses the issue of financing of measures enacted by states in order to react to crisis. So we have, this novelty of the budget of the European Union used with a complex legal construction, with an extraordinary operation outside the budget, with one-off operation increase of the budget. But what happens with Next Generation EU is that the EU becomes a borrower on the financial market. And also what is interesting is that with the Next Generation EU, the European Union is not only providing loans to states, but it is also providing grants to states. And this, I think, represents a novelty. in the panorama of situations. This represents a novelty, and it represents as well, I think, the consolidation of the EU as a borrower on the markets, I think. And it has a complex governance, we know about it, but I think that for me, indeed, the most interesting point is that with Next Generation EU and with other instruments that have been adopted afterwards, the European Union is becoming an actor that is also trying to achieve what Cristina Fasone and Linset have defined as a metabolic constitution. So a constitutional system that can convert resources into means and into instruments. We have seen as well the energy crisis, and for me that has been also quite a challenge, because it is a policy domain that is very different from what I used to study, and I think it is a challenge for EU lawyers in general to work on energy law. Not many of us are busy with this type of occupations. But so also there, I think that the European Union with the energy crisis has provided a package of activities and a package of instruments, of regulations, and also a policy regulation, a policy instrument, which is Repower EU. And if Repower is the strategic rethinking of the EU on energy policy after Russia invasion of Ukraine, the other instruments can be interpreted as what we have in Italy as decretazione d'urgenza. So I think that the other instruments that has been adopted on the legal basis of Article 122, paragraph 1, are indeed a demonstration of the fact that the European Union has indeed demonstrated, the capacity to intervene on the market and to resort to deploy solidarity in terms of try to limit the consequences of the asymmetrical consequences of the energy crisis on markets. I think this is really the meaning of solidarity in the context of energy law. Of course, there are challenges underlying these measures because indeed the states were not all agreeing in intervening. And I think indeed one of the elements that is, I think, typical of energy law is that even if we have this energy union, nevertheless, domestic markets are still present degrees of fragmentation, and also I think that once we have there a crisis, we see also that states have different capacities to react to this crisis because expression of the budgets that they have. And one of the indeed issues that have been discussed is that Germany has adopted an important package of measures supporting the domestic economy as a consequence of the energy crisis. So I think that their solidarity indeed has been deployed to enact temporary measures. Some of these measures have been consolidated in the reforms that have been adopted in mainly 2024 in the context of the energy union, and therefore indeed with these measures the European Union has demonstrated capacity to react with let's say with urgency to a crisis, and also with the integration of Repower EU into the RRF regulation. The goals of Repower has also been integrated into the let's say broader Next Generation EU package. What this analysis, let's say the legacy of this analysis is to be seen in chapter 4 and in the conclusion, where I address the horizontal, let's say, issues emerging from the activities, the responses of the European Union to this crisis. And I think that mainly two challenges emerge. Indeed, one is the increased resort to Article 122 and the future of Article 122 if this increased resort to this legal basis consolidates. And the second issue that remains is a bit related to what the European Union wants to do when it will grow up. So basically, I think the thorny issue that is left on the floor, the legacy of this crisis and of the responses, is what to do with what we need. So the centralized fiscal capacity for the European Union. I'll say a few things about Article 122. Perhaps we can come back to it in the Q&A session, but then I think this proved to be a legal basis. It is an exceptional legal basis on which, let's say, which demonstrates a broad scope. So I think for me, one of the questions left on the floor is, do we keep it like this, or is it time to enhance the participation? Not to enhance, to add the participation of the European Parliament by reforming it and by providing a role for the European Parliament in there. That might be indeed a solution that I put forward in terms of, as a doctrinal observation, but I don't have any hope that the political process will pay attention to this type of issues. But nevertheless, this is, in my view, showing that the barycenter of integration in terms of crisis is shifted towards the European Council and toward the Council of the European Union. So, and another issue that remains is, in my view, is indeed the thorny issue of the permanent fiscal capacity for the European Union. What I think all this crisis demonstrates is that we need a European Union that grows up and takes up its responsibilities as a polity that should be able to, to fulfill and to protect the legal goods created with integration in the bad days. So what we have seen, I think, with the European Stability Mechanism, but also what we see, we can also include the whatever it takes of Mario Draghi in this assessment, because I think, this is also part of the package. I think what is needed is a permanent fiscal capacity or a centralized fiscal capacity to protect states and citizens when a crisis affects the system. In this context, we have seen that the budget has become an instrument of financial solidarity. But I think that indeed what is left, the question which is left, is that we need instruments at European level in order to enact counter-cyclical policies when crises hit, and also, as it has been argued not by activists or by leftists, whatever, the European Central Bank has calculated that in order to finance the transitions of that the European Union is facing, and that the European Union and the member states must meet, we would need something equivalent to one Next Generation EU each year. Okay, so in order to finance what we need to do as European Union, that means also states, because the climate change is not something hitting the European Union, it's something that is on our head. So what we need is an instrument like one Next Generation EU, the amount of one Next Generation EU per year. I'm also not talking about idealistic things, I'm also talking about the digital transitions. And when we talk about the digital transitions, we know that powers like China are having a very important role in the control of critical infrastructure. So these are issues that are extremely vital for every member state. We also talk about defense. We talk about issues that are extremely vital for member states, and that are also very much connected to our security, to the security of the member states. So overall, what I think I've tried to explain in the book is that one of the roles of we can perhaps further elaborate on this centralized financial capacity, on what the experiment of Next Generation EU says about this centralized fiscal capacity. But what I think where I should conclude is that, in my understanding, one of the functions of solidarity as expression of the crisis that have been hitting the European Union in the last years is indeed that there is a legal content for solidarity, in the sense of a moral duty of the EU to intervene when a crisis hits the European Union, to protect the public goods of the EU. As we have seen, the content of this duty in legal terms is very much expression of the political will of the actors when the crisis arrives. And I've learned it from Susanna Cafaro in a previous presentation. The Next Generation EU is a bit the combination of a very exceptional alienation of the planets, as she put it time ago, that was really effective, and the renegotiation of the multi-annual financial framework, an extraordinary political, let's say, convergence between Germany and France into the necessity to adopt financial instruments. And therefore, these are, let's say, macro situations that you don't find every day, so to say. And solidarity is between correction and redistribution. So one of the core dilemmas of solidarity is the issue of redistribution within states, which is still a taboo for several states, whereas in complete integration, as it has worked so far, is already working as a transfer union. And this has been argued by economists, not by activists or whatever. So I think, we have to be able to breach some taboos. And I think that in this context, solidarity is also displaying a role, a very important role, as one of the constitutional clauses of the system that is therefore a vector of solidarity for the overall EU constitutional system, which is a process of integration which is relying on a good extent of openness and incompleteness. Yes, and I think that now I conclude here. We see right now many challenges ahead with us. We have to address the issue of competitiveness. We have to address the situation that the US are making it very clear that they are not there anymore to protect us, and they have their own view of security at global level, and that we have to be able to face our duties and be able to think for our own security and our own defense. A few days ago in Munich, Vance, the vice president, has pronounced a very, I think, a clear speech to some extent, where he made clear that transatlantic relations have changed. And for us, therefore, the urgent issues are indeed, what do we want to do? Defense. The first reply by Ursula von der Leyen has been to use again the escape clause for the Stability and Growth Pact. What this means that we are a bit, in my view, getting back to a point where it is again back to the states to provide for the solution of what is, in my understanding, a European good, because my security and my being protected from an external so an external threat is the same of a French citizens, of a Finnish citizens, and whatever. So I think I leave it at there. I think that I spoke for 25 minutes or a bit more. So thank you very much, and I'm curious to hear what you thought of the book, Susanna.
Thank you. Thank you very much for presenting clearly the arguments in your book and also importantly contextualizing it as well. Right, so now I'll give the floor to Susanna, who will have around 15 minutes for her comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Sian, and most of all, thank you, the organizers, and thank you, Luisa, for involving me in this conversation about this very interesting book. While you were talking, Luisa, I was thinking that maybe I'm not the perfect person to be a discussant because we are too much on the same page. So I confess that my very early publications, a number of years ago, started from the same premise: incomplete integration, supranationality, and so on, and the same conclusion: the need for a European fiscal capacity. So what is changed since then is that all that is in the middle. I mean, I wrote before all the crises. And now we have all the crises as a very important test of this theory. So it's confirmed that we need a fiscal capacity. So I will focus on this territory in the middle between the premise and the conclusion, and which is the management of the crisis. And I want to tell you, Luisa, that I very much appreciated your approach to this way of categorizing the reaction to the crisis, which was different in every situation, was different in the financial crisis, in the energy crisis, in the pandemic crisis, finding a common pattern, which is the idea to fill these cracks, these wide spaces due to the incompleteness of the institutional system, with flexibility and with creativity, and using the solidarity principle as a way to channel this flexibility and this creativity in new tools. So this way to build a common pattern, identify a common pattern, is very interesting in your book. So I appreciated this approach very much. It's interesting how this emergency that we have seen, this emergency approach, which is also a pattern of the times. So the idea to give fast answers and grounded on temporary measures, which are by definition, the emergency patterns are not too democratic because between parliaments are slow and governments are much faster. So we see here what also happens at national level. So these emergency tools, which are skipping patterns, skipping parliaments, public debates to go through the fast track of government decisions. In the European Union is mostly grounded on Article 122. And I agree with you that there is a problem with this Article 122, which is an emergency clause. So it's difficult to build something permanent over that. What I find interesting, which makes a big difference between the financial crisis and the pandemic crisis, is the fact that while the first one was clearly grounded on an ordoliberal approach, on an economic approach grounded on the need to keep the rules strong, so which led clearly to the austerity approach. The second one was grounded on a completely different economic vision, which was a more neo-Keynesian vision. So the idea that we need liquidity into the system, put fresh liquidity into the system to help overcome the crisis. So it's a real paradigm shift. I doubt that the new crisis would be managed in the same way. Maybe we would go back to the ordoliberal one, because I see a different wind now in the European politics. So this is just to say that the emergency has also these features that emergency change according to the moment. the reaction, the way we react to emergency, because governments change, political views change. So it's very interesting how these, in this chaos, because it's a chaos, you still find some grounding, anchoring pattern, which is the fact that all this flexibility and creation to fill the gaps goes in the direction sometimes of building something that remains. So as the European Stability Mechanism, which was built as an emergency tool, but created to remain, and it's still there, and in the pandemic was still there to provide some kind of response. So so this is interesting, finding some ground, something that remains also in the chaos of the different political views, which in a sense shape the emergency reactions according to the time and to the moment when things occur. So what will happen after the Next Generation EU is a big question mark. And I agree with you that the Grundnorm is still Article 122. But it's very interesting, in my opinion, how the resilience, recovery and resilience facility was, regulation was, had a different legal basis, which is Article 175, the cohesion policy. And I think the cohesion policy could be the answer, because the cohesion policy is intended with a longer view. And it's intended for solidarity. Still, all the cohesion policy of the Union has this feature to be solidarity among territories, not only among states, like the redistribution after the Next Generation EU, but also in the structural funds when we have regions, it's among territories. Still, the EU moves with the idea of the solidarity among territories, not among individuals. And this is a big limit of I think. It's a big limit because it's still in the logic of intergovernmental organizations more than constitutional logic. Because solidarity among individuals goes with the idea that you need taxation to raise funds and support to individuals in need as a reallocation general principle, while we have this reallocation among territories that, in my opinion, is always risky because it may generate a sort of competition among territories or jealousies among territories, which are more easily fueled than among individuals, because they can sum up with the nationalist views. So especially in those times we are living now, there is this idea that if I have to help another people living in another territory, but in my territory there is a strong, populist narrative or nationalist narrative stating that I should think of myself first, then this solidarity principle is killed, definitely. While if we move among individuals, so if this fiscal capacity that to be built is among individuals, then everybody can contribute, and the contribution is to everybody who needs it, wherever the territory. So you, in a sense, circumvent the risk of the competition among nationalities, among ethnic groups, among regions, among territories, among peoples, because you are helping at the same time the person in need next door as the one in Greece, in Portugal, in Finland, wherever. So this is a way, in such the times that we live in, where this is I think, the neutral way to make solidarity work. The other critical, and so this is a possible way for further investigation. And in the previous commission, there was this idea. I think it was also in Gentiloni's letter as a commissioner, job description, let's say, to work on the unemployment scheme. Then this idea, I don't know why, disappeared from the horizon, but this idea of a European unemployment scheme was exactly the idea of solidarity among the individuals. So it's not something completely new or strange for the European Union thinking. It's just something that has not been successful until now. The other thing I think that the other way to be explored is of course another, unfortunately at the moment closed way, which is the treaty reform, because it's perfectly true that a fiscal capacity can be built without a treaty reform, because both the budget and the multi-annual financial framework could easily raise the roofs of the ceilings of the money to be collected, and could easily identify specific destination for the money without any treaty change. So the fiscal capacity doesn't need treaty change per se. Still there is both this unanimity, a block both on own resources and on multi-annual financial framework, which means this veto power for all the states, which is very difficult to overcome in this moment. And this blockage of the unanimity, together with this emergency pattern, which sees the parliament on the sideline while the council and the European Council decide everything, are the two, let's say, intergovernmental stumbling blocks to the idea of solidarity among individuals, which in the end is very much connected to the democratic features of the system, because both taxation requires a representation, but also solidarity towards individuals require parliamentary discourse and analysis of which are the global the needs, and so the public goods to be cared for. So back again to your book, I think you identified very interesting notes, let's say points, turning points that could be developed into further researches, and I don't enter because it's really complex into the energy analysis. I congratulate you, because I wouldn't step there. It's really difficult and it's very technical, but it's interesting. I think it's interesting from another perspective. It's very interesting in terms of external relations, because in this moment also this concept of strategic autonomy deserves lots of exploration, in my opinion, because I wonder which is the limit between strategic autonomy and protectionism, and where exactly we want to go, and if we want to, or still are able to have an agenda, or we are just in reaction to the agenda of others, of US, Russia, China. And this is another big question mark in this moment. I would like to see the Union proactive in this scenario, but still I see not only reaction, but very weak reaction to whatever happens. And so I stop here. I don't want to start to complain, because it becomes too sad and maybe boring. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. I'll now give the floor back to you, Luisa, to respond.
Okay, yes, thank you, Susanna. Indeed, I think that we share our views, because we are a bit, you lawyers, we are a bit sick of idealism, I think, and we still think about the European Union as it could have developed, but as it did not develop. So I got a lot of notes from what you said, and I tried to make some order, let's say, my ideas. And I know I will not succeed because indeed I got a lot of inputs, and I want to say many things. And so I think indeed, as to the I think you touched upon many interesting things, and also very crucial issues concerning also our external relations, and you know what you said also about energy law. Indeed, the energy law has been quite a nightmare, and I've really at many times I thought, why have I chosen this domain? But I think after all I was happy. And and I also realized that even their energy is also related with environment, is also related with external security. So external relations of the member states, it's related with security. So I thought that even there, I got a good test case to test my hypothesis, because it was indeed an area showing that a crisis is usually entailing the solution, the adoption of solutions that really do not match to the wonderful system of attributed competencies that we have been working on since then. And then, you know, a complex problem requires a complex solution, and we have to match with this issue of legal basis, but the policies answers are intertwined, and therefore, you know, it's very complex. And I think that all these complex crises represent a stress test for the principle of attributed powers. You can really, you know, of course we are lawyers and we have to stick to laws, but in all this, the functioning of these rules, there is a lot of room for openness. This is something we have to consider. So one of the issues left is indeed what represent Next Generation EU for the EU, and we know that we will need treaty reforms to fix many problems, but there is nothing inside that shows us that there is political maturity to face those treaty reforms. And the most urgent reforms, perhaps it's on Article 311 on the own resources decision, because we have these rules that stick, that really limits a lot what the European Union can do, and this limits what the European Union can do to protect the goods created with integration. And these are unanimity rule, and we see that this entails a veto power of that states use for the most disparate problems, and we have seen that also with Hungary, with the conditionality. So with the conditionality policy embedded in Next Generation EU, then we also have the ratification according to the constitutional requirements of the member state. This is also something that hinders the process very much. So we will need treaty reforms. There is nothing inside to demonstrate that there is a political maturity of the needed treaty reforms. So then the question is, what is therefore the role of constitutional transformations? What is the role of constitutional transformation in this context? And I think also here, I think writing about you know, the affirmation of a process of constitutional transformation on Article 125. We could also say the same thing for Article 300, I think. Is it 8 or 10 on the principle of a balanced budget? I'm not so indeed sure about it, because if these tendencies do not consolidate into something, so if this tendency to go to a different interpretation, for example, by allowing for neo-Keynesian policies to take place when a crisis is there, I don't know to which extent we can talk about the constitutional interpretations if this novelty does not consolidate structurally. Okay, so but I think that we need even there a lot of flexibility on the interpretation of the rules. And what we see as well is that there is indeed room for flexibility depending on the political will of the core actors of the system. And these are still states. These are still states who do not want to address issues that can be a solution of the system. And I think that in the context of taxation, You have mentioned very interesting examples on the side of the spending, but there are also interesting examples on the side of the revenues of the European Union that could be adopted in order to provide the European Union for the means it has in order to be in order to have a metabolic constitution, as I explained before. And I think that what is also on the stage is that we have now ETS, we have now CBAM, but we have to think of new own resources. And in this context, one of the issues would be something like the European translation of what is at international level the corporate minimum tax. So we could also have there an instrument that would address the asymmetries between member states in taxation matters by providing for something like a minimum corporate tax. And this will be also a very interesting instrument that the EU could use in order to have a taxation that is addressing imbalances between member states, that is addressing also something that can be framed also as competition between member states in taxation matters as to what we have as you know, in the context of the internal market. So I find this as something that, you know, it's one of the solutions of the problem. It's there, I see it, but I don't think that there is anything close to a political will to adopt something similar. But this will be a wonderful, I think, proof of maturity by the European Union in order to be able to adopt something that is indeed taxing the competition between member states and making it into a budget and transferring it into resources in order to provide European citizens on a redistributive basis, as you mentioned, for something that is typical of unemployment scheme. That could be something that you mentioned. But so that could be other ways to address forms of solidarity, even by touching the most, let's say, unfair competition between states within the European Union, which is, you know, these huge disparities in taxation. So I think that indeed this will be important, but other instruments could be there. A treaty reform, of course, will be needed, but will be needed in order to address the more structural, let's say, problems. We have seen with the pandemic crisis that changes in the system can be adopted also without treaty reforms, and the residual legal basis of 175.3 of the cohesion policy is one of these instruments. Of course, perhaps this would change a bit. This wouldn't change, you know, by addressing issues like consolidating the European debt and thinking about addressing competition between states in taxation matters. That might indeed provide a link, a more direct link between the Union to the citizens. And I think this link is not there with Next Generation EU, because Next Generation EU is translated into legal orders with national plans of recovery and resilience. So the funding of Next Generation EU is common, is European, but the translation of Next Generation EU into the system is made by the state. So I think this, I've been seeing this as one of the solutions that break the link between citizens and union. And so, and I think you have addressed also important issues concerning democracy and representation. But I think that, you know, even without going there, I think that we would have the tools to address the imbalances created by integration as it is today. And I think that, you know, one of these aspects, I think for me, the most the most urgent one is also to address imbalances in taxation of companies across EU member states. So I really, so I think I leave it here, but I think indeed we have in the system of the European Union several instruments indeed to provide for solutions and to make it as a more reactive governance system. But I think what we can say is that this is still very much left on the political will of the member states, and I find this as a very difficult to see emancipation from the European Union from an intergovernmental nature, which in some crucial moment is, I think, still visible. I stop it here.
Thank you. Just before I open the floor to questions, I was just wondering, Susanna, if there are any particular things you wanted to respond, or?
I would like to leave the floor to eventual possible questions.
Okay. All right. So yes, please either put your question in the chat or raise your hand and I'll call you to open your mic.
Shannon, I have a question, if I may, in order
Yes, of
to
course.
break the ice. Well, thanks so much. Thanks so much, Luisa and Susanna. I think that there's been a great discussion, and I want to congratulate our speakers. Congratulations, of course, to Luisa on this very interesting book. I learned a lot from reading it, and I want to ask 3 questions. I mean, the first one is more, how can I say, the political in nature. One in a way, I mean, try to draw some political consequences from a very interesting analysis like this. We have already discussed, I mean, about the concept of sovereignty. I benefited from a lot from reading, I mean, a draft of this work, and would like to ask the following thing. When you say that the European Union system is incomplete, are you suggesting that the EU should become a state or a federation? And do you think this would necessarily lead to overcoming the sui generis nature of the Union? First question. Second question, which is more technical, more legal, so to say, that as you said, you also covered the past crisis in the first part of the book. And in this respect, what are your thoughts about the debate regarding the constitutional impact of the economic and financial crisis? Some scholars have spoken of a sort of constitutional mutation of the EU, while others, for instance, Bruno De Witt, have instead referred to an institutional variation, emphasizing that the changes described have not been so fundamental, given that the EU has historically relied on intergovernmental and international law instruments to navigate crisis, also in the past. What do you think about that? Third question, you recall the issue or the question of competitiveness, and you also recalled the important legacy of Mario Draghi. But what do you think about Mario Draghi's report on the future of European competitiveness? Because do you think it could influence the concept of solidarity? I'm asking this because currently I think that the Mario Draghi report that has been used as an excuse, I mean, for a libertarian shift, has been used by supporters of Donald Trump even to advocate, I mean, for the sort of unbound capitalism. And I don't think that this is the main, I mean, point, I mean, by Mario Draghi, but I would like to note what you think about the possible consequences in terms of solidarity of his plan. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Also, I wanted to ask, do you also want to collect the question that's in the chat?
I think it's better to collect some questions, if I may. And for the recording, I would like to ask Sian to read the questions. I mean, thank you.
Okay. So yes, the question is, in the presentation and in the book, you pointed out that solidarity can be a clause of constitutional flexibility. Do you think that this constitutional flexibility to be good, or can it be flexibly to be bad as well? I can see two main meanings of solidarity in the 2020 until today crisis of solidarity welfare, meant as legal instrument of redistribution among European peoples and territories, and solidarity survivalism related to resilience, strategic autonomy, competitiveness, military security, crisis, etc. If the latter prevails, could solidarity legitimize new distortions / unfair settlements in the name of the continent's securitization? Thinking, for example, about the recent announcement of EU Competitiveness Fund, which largely dismantles cohesion policy as it is today to address European competitiveness goals.
You perhaps want to collect also Jock Gardiner's question, or shall I reply right now? I didn't understand.
Sorry, yes, Jock. Sorry, I didn't see your hand up there. Please
No,
go
all
ahead.
good, all good. Thank you, Professor, for the presentation. I enjoyed it a lot. My question is a little more basic. It's to do with the concept of solidarity and how it's been lent upon more and more in various court judgments. And I'm interested in your take on the extent to which the more and more the EU leans upon solidarity as a concept, and potentially an actionable concept, that it's actually a sign of weakness within the EU, that the more and more the EU turns to the courts to invoke principles such as solidarity or sincere cooperation, that it's a sign of there being a lack of solidarity and of something more fundamentally going wrong within the EU politically. So rather than it being seen as a useful mechanism, it's actually more of a canary in the coal mine situation.
And then also, Camilla, you have a question. Sorry, I know you unmuted yourself, but still cannot hear you. No. Okay.
Okay, so
You-
perhaps, yeah. Camilla?
Perhaps Camilla wants, do you try with some buttons or?
I would suggest the following, if I may. I will say that Luisa could try to answer these questions. In the meantime, Camilla could try to write the question in a very synthetic manner. I mean, to allow then Sian to read it for the recording.
Yes, that would be wonderful also, because like otherwise I don't remember the questions.
Nice.
No, indeed. Your first question, I think, your first remark, Giuseppe, was, I think, on the political dimension of this crisis, and if I remember correctly,
Yeah,
like
on the I will say on the political consequences. So what you suggest in the book. So wanted to know, I mean, whether you are also suggesting a sort of federal upgrade of the European Union or not.
Yes.
That was my first question.
Yes. I think that two things. One can be a cultural bias. So as a scholar, I started to look at it with the constitutional law background, and I think that, you know, perhaps some idealism on federalism and so forth. I think that from all what I try to understand on the first, let's say, great financial crisis, I also understood, working on economic literature, that a monetary union without a fiscal union is an accident waiting to happen. And I think that many American economists simply, when we had the crisis, told us, what did you do? So how can you expect that now you have the instruments to face a crisis? So there might be, you know, a legal perspective, but there might be also an economical perspective, that the very system of integration is really codifying few rules, and are codifying also the some policy preference of the actors at that time, and they also, you know, require, for example, the Article 125. We are stuck with that Article 123, and when we've had the first crisis, economists told us, you know, with these rules, things cannot really work. So we have, I think, to find indeed solutions. And if I have to relate that to a more actual proposal that I wanted to discuss, and I think that this is one of the interesting proposals, I think, of literature. I think that Fabrini is explaining, Sergio Fabrini is explaining in one of these of his latest works, is that the European Union could go ahead with rethinking itself in terms of concentric circles, with deepening integration, with toward the federation, with a group of states that wants to go ahead. I think this is needed, because what we see right now, and then the union, and then an external confederation adding new member states. I think we have to think about solutions on how to boost integration, not to leave it in this state of, you know, crisis, where we have foreign representatives coming to us and telling that we are the problem, like Vance did a few days ago. And I think we need something of a more reform, of more federal reform to some extent. I don't see any of it in sight, but I think that we would need something like this in order to consolidate what we have seen happening with the crisis. And then the observation of constitutional mutation and constitutional variations. I've also tried to explain in the book that, yeah, there is an embryo of fiscal capacity emerging into this context. If I see a constitutional mutation there, I think that for the temporality of Next Generation EU, I think that the European Union is consolidating itself as a borrower on the market. So I think that there is, you know, like a European debt that is, I think, going to be there for several years. And so far we don't have, I think, many means for repayment, because I think that what is there so far is not enough to repay the debt. And it looks to me that because of the complexities of the governance system, it's just a problem which is left there. I don't think that nobody's thinking right now how to pay back the debt of the EU, because we have in any case time until 2058. So that's not a problem, I think, for any of our politicians. So I would say there a constitutional mutation. The others look to me more constitutional variations, because, as I said, so there is a novelty of Next Generation EU with this, with the grants, but it seems to me that we came back to the old Stability and Growth Pact logic, and right now I don't see anything close to the will to adopt anything close to a Next Generation EU to finance the transitions. Draghi, I think that he has written a report from the standpoint of an economist. I hope, Giuseppe, my interpretation is not too naive, okay? So I think that he has written a report touching on many issues, many aspects, and with a lot of proposals also for the European Union on how to finance transitions. It's not only about public spending, can be also private spending. So I think, Draghi, there is a lot in there, but I think that then politicians take what they want in order to so from a report. So I see, and I hope I'm not too naive or idealistic, that one writes something from the standpoint of the economic, let's say, scholarship and theory, but then politicians do what they want, and it can indeed be seen as you said, like. So the question right now is what is going to be left about the Green Deal. Now they talk about dismantling simplification, dismantling red tape. What I think we should ask as citizens, and what European politics should ask, is that also climate change mitigation goals are still there, not only red tape in order to be competitive with the US or whatever. So I think this is, I think, one of the issues that are to be seen. But I also think that politicians do whatever they want about what we write there as and this links as well with the first question on the chat, the question by Saverio della Corte. I think from UI, we never met in person, though I had at one point I heard your name from Deirdre Curtin, that and was also my supervisor when I was there. What you write as a risk, I think it is there, and so I don't know about this solidarity survivalism, but I think that indeed what I invocate as openness and flexibility can be used in any directions, and so I think that what you mentioned might be a risk. I don't know this competitiveness fund, but I think that therefore I will look at it into the details, because I think that might be interesting for me as well. But I think that indeed too much openness and too much flexibility in the system can be related to this risk as well. So I think you are right. And to Joke, I especially liked your comment, thank you. And I think that there has been a bit in the history of the European Union this interplay between strengths and weaknesses between the legal dimension and the policy dimension. But I don't think that. But I think that this is a bit also. And I think this relates to let's say, past decades, when we have seen a strength of a legal integration process that was at times also matched with the weakness of the political integration process. And I think what you say is also about solidarity is very well linked with the Opal judgment of the Court of Justice of the European Union in energy law. And that was also, I think, I related with the political weakness of the European Union, that in this context was a bit the game was led by Germany, with keeping strong energy relations with Russia, even after the 2014 Crimea crisis. So I think that's an interesting observation, but I think that nevertheless, I still think that there is value in the legal discourse in itself, and legal, legal reasoning can. This relates, for example, also with the solidarity, with the conditionality regulation judgments. Just to conclude the reasoning that you have, but. So then the question is that I think that there is a value of the legal discourse in itself, and a value that, these principles are used in the adjudication by the Court of Justice, and I think that the political discourse is a bit having its own, its own track, and what we see now, I think, is again. I think a stasis or a stagnating moment for integration, but I don't think it can last very much. So I don't want to, I stop it here because I see other hands raised, and yeah. I hope
Yes,
I've addressed your comments.
So yes, I'll read out Camilla's question from earlier. So how do you envisage the operationalization of this centralized fiscal capacity in the light of the fact that some member states are outside the Eurozone and most probably won't be able or willing to join soon? In this regard, would the idea of concentric circles of membership, as recently suggested, be feasible? Secondly, how could it be
Sorry, if I can, maybe now
Yeah.
you can hear me.
Oh, we can hear you now as well.
Yes. I had some connection issues most probably. So the second question regards, what do you think, whether and how the principle of solidarity can be deployed to tackle the living crisis? So the other rental flats crisis and an accommodation crisis that hits basically all European Union member states, and especially the younger generations.
And also, Maria, can we collect your question as well?
Yes, thank you, Luisa, very much for the presentation and of course for the book. I hope it's going to be fine because I have the kids screaming there, so I hope it's going to be that you can hear it. So I just wanted, so I have, I don't know, a question or a remark, because in your book, I think this idea of this solidarity as a flexibility clause of the system, I really like it, and in principle I agree with you that we need flexibility in the system, not that we cannot, especially because it's basically impossible to change the treaties, then we need these clauses. I'm just wondering, how much can we go on about that? So I think it's a question about the boundaries of this operation, and whether there is not then at some point a backlash on, achieving always things by other means, no? And again, we don't have a strong legal basis, okay, but we can do it through solidarity, through cohesion, through other things. And I'm, wondering whether this then in the end in the system is not harming the democratic system, of the EU. And then very quickly, again, I also think I agree with those who flag these worries about these concerns about this competitiveness turn, no? Because I also think that, now we are using, for instance, cohesion as a sort of, there is this risk of using it as a sort of big industrial policy that loses then the connection with the territories, that loses a little bit maybe also the social economic component of that. So I don't know how this will impact on solidarity. Thank you.
And then in the interest of time, Gianluca, can you ask your question very briefly, so then there's time to respond? Thank you.
Gianluca, il microfono.
Thanks, Luisa. I'm sorry that I joined this seminar late, but I had the privilege of reading Luisa's books in advance, of reading the draft of the book. So in a certain sense, I really appreciated the structure of the book, and I also appreciated the capacity of Luisa to mingle different meanings of different aspects of solidarity within the EU, and to highlight what's missing in the application of today's solidarity within the EU legal order, which is a lack of flexibility. So I have essentially three questions. Probably you already know my first question is, what is missing in the constitutional structure to apply in an effectively the principle of solidarity within the EU legal order? So probably we need more democracy, or a respect of the democratic principle. The second question is, how can we, well, we already discussed about this problem, how can we transform in reality the Draghi's report? So in other words, what we need to allow the EU to borrow the money and to finance the acquisition of European goods on the market. And the third question probably is linked to the second one. How can we introduce an effective fiscal capacity of the EU? So I know that they are probably the answer of these three questions would require quite a long time, probably another seminar, but I hope you can summarize and find some short answers. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you all, and thank you very much, Maria and Camilla and Gianluca. Gianluca, especially because he read indeed the whole book and in the gestation phase. So I will try to be brief, also because Giuseppe reminded us of the time. So I think at 7 we'll conclude. Maria, which are the limits of this? Indeed, I think that the limits are, your questions are related. The limits are that I think in all this contexts, we see that there is a stronger dimension of intergovernmental politics. I think there is. I think this is a bit a limitation of the overall thing, and it is shifting the barycenter of European integration, as I have written, toward again states being at the center of integration and deciding everything on the decisions on the shoulders of the citizens. Where are the limits? I think then again I see there that there is a strengthening of the intergovernmental politics dimension, and I think this weakens at the end of the day the role of the individual. With the Next Generation EU, this went to the benefit of some states in particular, but I think that indeed it can be discussed that this can be going ahead in this way forever. Of course, the ideal situation would be a treaty reform, and I think that we need that. We would need that in order to enhance also the democracy of the system and to actually make sure that all these solutions are not taken with a very conjunctural solution of the multi-annual financial framework, the residual legal basis in the context of cohesion policy, and so forth. However, this is not going to happen, I think, in any time soon. So perhaps one of these visions, I think, of Sergio Fabrini, this concentric circle, in a way with a stronger process of integration, of federation, for a group of states or on some matters, that might be the answer. And I think this will be also the answer to address also democracy issues. In my view, the individual is still right now not at the center of integration, because as we have seen with Next Generation EU, the initiatives of the EU are mediated by the intervention of the states. And therefore, it is again the state that translates this solidarity into specific measures. And I think this is a limitation. I see this as a limitation. So that's, at one point I wrote that this is an exercise, this was an exercise of interstate solidarity. But I think that this is a limitation of the overall process. As to Draghi's report, I think that I might repeat myself, but in the Draghi report, I think that there are many things and several issues could be addressed also, for example, in the context of addressing the financing of these measures, and also private investors should invest more money in financing these transitions. But I don't have any receipt in this respect. So I think that indeed we have issues of seeing how this flexibility clauses can be used, and that too much flexibility, I mean, in the system is still shifting the barycenter of integration towards an intergovernmental, let's say, drive or an so the process is conducted, is driven by an intergovernmental politics, and I find this is a bit of a problem, because in my view it weakens the legal dimension of the European Union. Treaty reforms will be needed, but without treaty reforms, then I think that we must do with what we have, and then it's really about using the laws, forging the laws, shifting the interpretation of the laws. And I conclude by saying, for example, also that what we've seen with Article 122 is that, and that was, I think, observed by Giuseppe at the beginning, I think, was that both domestically and also at supranational level, there is a stronger role for governments in our context. And I think also, in Italy as well, now the decision making is mainly led by government, and very often it is decreto legge that are converted into laws. So I don't know if, and I leave it here, if it is a problem that really our democracies are suffering in these days. And but I don't have the recipe for solutions. For a solution, at least right now, these are some reflections that have been spurred, that have been developed by me, thanks also to your feedback. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. This does bring us to the end of our time, but I'd like to thank again our wonderful speakers and of course organizers of this webinar. And thank you so much to everyone for joining and participating. It was really great to see such rich discussion from everyone. So yes, I hope you all have a good